On this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, G.G. Jackson gets his flowers, second team all-rookie NBA selection. Very exciting times for G.G. Plus, I defend the Minnesota Timberwolves and the hate that some Grizzlies fans are giving them on social media. Plus, concerns about restlessness on Donovan Clingan Island. Is my fee-fi-fo-fum love expanding? We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello. Happy Tuesday to you and yours. It is I, Joe Mullinax, on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Flying solo, no DeMichael Cole with me today. It is you and I talking Grizzlies basketball for the next 25 to 30-ish minutes as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Again, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We greatly appreciate it. The good vibes continue to roll here on Locked On Grizzlies as the month of May continues to roll through. And school years might be ending and folks might be getting ready for summer vacations. We're not quite there yet here on Locked On Grizzlies, not quite at the vacation station. To this point, we continue to grind forth. And on this episode, we have something positive to lead off with, right? We're not talking about opposing teams' playoff successes, at least not yet. We'll talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves later on in the program. But we have something Grizzlies related to celebrate to start off today's show, and that is G.G. Jackson being named second team All-NBA in terms of the rookie team, the official term, the 2023-2024 NBA All-Rookie Second Team. G.G. Jackson played in 48 games this season, and this is from the press release that the Grizzlies put out there announcing the acknowledgement for G.G. Started 18 games, averaged 14.6 points, 4.1 rebounds, and 1.2 assists. More on that number here in a moment. In the 25.7 minutes that he played, he was selected by the Grizzlies with the 45th overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. He was the youngest player in the NBA this season. He ranked fourth among rookies in scoring average, third after the All-Star break, also ranked fourth in defensive rating among rookies who average at least 24 minutes per game. G.G. Jackson is the fifth Grizzlies player in the last 6 seasons to receive all rookie honors, including Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant, and Brandon Clark, and Desmond Bane. So all of those very important members of the Grizzlies core have been all rookie selections at some point. Jaren, Ja, and Clark, of course, being first team selections in the years that they were chosen. Desmond Bane joining G.G. in the second team selection process. I don't know about you, dear listener, dear viewer, but I am thrilled for young G.G. Jackson. And there are things to be excited about in that press release from the Memphis Grizzlies, and there are things that still need to be areas of growth for G.G. to become what so many people want him to be, right? And I do think that that's an important thing to lead off with here, because I've seen people say this on social media. They've brought it up in our comments here on Locked On Grizzlies, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube especially. It's brought up in the comments the idea of G.G. Jackson being the 6'9" combo forward, can play the three, that defensive rating being extremely significant because G.G. Jackson was tasked with defending the opposing team's best scorer, best player offensively on numerous occasions as the season concluded, partly because of all the injuries, partly because Taylor Jenkins wanted to see what the young man could do. And that was a worthwhile investment, right? You saw improvement. You saw growth, understanding of angles, the need to cut off dribble penetration, the need to create and penetrate passing lanes, then using his frame and his size to his advantage. That growth was evident coming out of the All-Star break. And if that was a clear priority for the Grizzlies coaching staff, I would say they succeeded. I'm not saying G.G. Jackson's an elite defender, but he's certainly much better at it than he was going into the season. And that is a key cog of what Memphis does, as you and I both know, having followed this team more than likely in the case of you checking out Locked On Grizzlies on a Tuesday in May. Chances are you've watched some Grizzlies basketball from time to time, and if you haven't, you missed out on G.G. Jackson's growth, especially as a defender. Scoring-wise, that's never been a question with G.G., right? 3-point maybe, that was a little bit of a concern. And his growth as a three-point shooter was pretty evident, right? Mid-30s, and his three-point shooting this past season, that was better than he's ever shot the basketball from beyond the arc. So the work that the coaching staff is doing with G.G. is clearly paying off. And of course, G.G. Jackson deserves the most of the credit for the way that he has invested his time and his efforts to go from a 45th overall pick that was on a two-way contract to an all-rookie team member in such a short time period and such a limited sample size of games. That speaks to the talent that G.G. Jackson has, and Grizzlies fans should be very excited. However, for me, there's an in-between, because I think that there's also a smaller contingency of Grizzlies fans who don't believe the hype when it comes to G.G. They don't see him as someone that can help the team contend. I've seen it floated out there every once in a while that maybe G.G. Jackson could be a trade piece for this Grizzlies team. And I have a really hard time with that, because for a long time, if you've been following this team as long as I have, going all the way back to 2012, 2011, you know that this team has been looking for a guy who could be what G.G. Jackson appears to be able to do. A three-level scorer that can also defend. From Rudy Gay to Tayshaun Prince to Jeff Green, on and on I could go about the pursuit of a wing that could be an elite player for this Grizzlies team and help get the squad to the next level. They may well have it in G.G. Jackson. He possesses a talent, a scoring ability that Vince Williams Jr. doesn't have, that Marcus Smart doesn't have. He has a talent for the game of basketball that cannot be denied, and that matters. However, there is the small reality of him being the youngest player in the NBA this past season. It's not like he's going to age 5 years in one. He'll still be one of the NBA's youngest players going into year 2. He still has areas of his game to grow. He could still be better as a defender on the perimeter in particular. He did some good things there, but he could be better. He could be a much better facilitator of offense, and we've talked about that here on Locked On Grizzlies before. Those assist numbers are concerning. They're concerning for me. The fact that he only posted 1.2 assists a game and 25.7 minutes played, the fact that he has one of the worst assist ratios and rates in the entire association, regardless of rookies, one of the worst ones, period, that makes me worried, because if he's going to be a starter, right? Because that's one of the arguments. You finally have the 6'9" wing. Why in the hell is he not starting? He is such a high usage scoring player that he would not be able to, at this stage of his career, play off of John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. in the way where he's that fourth scoring option. And you could sit there and say that he shouldn't be the fourth scoring option anyway, but that would be a foolish thing to say on a team that's trying to contend for a championship right now. But for me, there's an in-between. I don't think that G.G. Jackson can't contribute to a championship contending team. I most certainly think he can. And I've talked about this. I've planted this flag. I'm going to stay on this island. We'll talk about Donovan Clingan Island later on in the show. But I'm going to stay on the G.G. Jackson as sixth man scoring wing island. 20 to 25 minutes a game. And you play him alongside one of Ja, Dez, Jaren. Never amongst all three. Maybe between two of them. He could be the rose between two thorns, so to speak. But you never play G.G. with all of them, because you lose what he brings to the table as a scorer with him not being the facilitator you want to see him be. Doesn't mean G.G.'s bad. Doesn't mean he shouldn't play. I think in a 9 to 10 man rotation on a championship contending team, there is a spot for G.G. Jackson and what he provides as a scorer. That is a pretty impressive thing to show, and that is reflected in his selection to this NBA all-rookie team. But let's not go crazy in terms of saying he should be a starter for said team. Not yet. Not for me. He should be a major player, maybe depending on the game he closes. I wouldn't trade him. but I certainly think that he's not ready to be a starter because he is not there as a facilitator of offense for others. He needs to be better in that space before I could say, let's put G.G. Jackson in the starting lineup. I would start Marcus Smart or Vince Williams Jr. over G.G. Jackson. Doesn't mean that G.G. Jackson doesn't play. He should play comparable minutes to those two guys, depending on how you divvy them up. But I like G.G. in that reserve role, being that scoring punch off the bench for a team that's actually trying to win basketball games. G.G. put up a lot of his numbers and did a lot of his work for a team that was pretty bad at that point. What say you? Let me know how you feel about G.G. Jackson, second team all NBA or all rookie NBA team. Congratulations to him. Whether he's starting as a reserve, I envision a big future, both short and long term, for G.G. in Memphis. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, who knocked off the Denver Nuggets in one of the most impressive Game 7 comebacks in NBA history. Grizzlies fans are hating on these guys, and I'm not exactly sure why. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Prize Picks. I am a big fan of Prize Picks, and you most certainly should be as well. Prize Picks does phenomenal work in terms of them helping you get in on the playoff action, winning up to 100 times your money as you and the world's best players take a game and the game to the next level during basketball's postseason, and hockey and baseball, of course, as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, as well as baseball entries today on Prize Picks. Caitlin Clark, Anthony Edwards, who we'll talk about here momentarily, Jason Tatum, up and down the world of basketball, you can get in on the action. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download Prize Picks today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It is that easy. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, talking Minnesota Timberwolves and why Memphis fans should be supportive of them. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. No DeMichael Cole, my wonderful co-host of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Having computer troubles, that happens in this line of work from time to time, and I'm happy to fill in. Happy to have you with me, dear listener, dear viewer, as we talk about the positives of the Grizzlies situation. G.G. Jackson, one of the best young players in the NBA, as evidence shines through in his selection to the second-team NBA All-Rookie squad. Very exciting times in Memphis, but we don't have basketball to talk about right now, right? At least not Memphis Grizzlies basketball. We're comparing ourselves to other teams. And the team that is in vogue for the Grizzlies fan to be comparing themselves to right now is the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Oklahoma City Thunder have been knocked off by the Dallas Mavericks, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are now in a position to perhaps take advantage of that and be the Western Conference's representative in the NBA Finals. And I think that has some Grizzlies fans in their feelings a little bit, to be honest with you, because it's like Anthony Edwards has taken Ja Morant's spot as the next young face of the NBA. It feels like the Timberwolves, while they are not young like Memphis or Oklahoma City are, and I'll talk more about that here in a moment, it feels like the Wolves have that upstart vibe, that rush to the finals that was supposed to be Memphis. I can kind of see that, right? I can see why that would be frustrating for a Grizzlies fan to watch someone have what you want and what you believe your team should have if injuries hadn't happened and Ja Morant's suspensions hadn't occurred. But the sad reality is the suspensions did occur and the injuries did happen, not just to Ja Morant, of course, but to the entire roster, it felt like at times. Numerous important players on the roster missing multiple games. You don't get G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. having their gap year seasons that they had if this team is healthy. They just don't see the minutes. So there's pros and cons to that reality. The Grizzlies were not a very good basketball team this year for a variety of reasons. Minnesota was. And I think that two things can be true at the same time, right? The Minnesota Timberwolves have a legitimate shot to get out of the Western Conference, to get to the NBA Finals, to get beat by the Boston Celtics. I think everybody agrees, at least should agree, that the Boston Celtics are the NBA Finals favorites. They probably have been since the beginning, but they most certainly are now, both to get through the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then whoever comes out of the West, I think it'll be a better game than, or a better series than Indiana and Boston, but that's not saying much. It could be Boston in 5 or 6 as opposed to Boston in 4, like I think the Boston-Indiana series will be. Mavs and Timberwolves is going to be interesting. And I'm very excited to watch that play out because I think that, again, two things can be true at the same time. We are witnessing the rise of the next very good contender in the Western Conference, the Minnesota Timberwolves, adding their names to the list, taking out the Denver Nuggets. Nikola Jokic can go and see his horses now. I'm sure he's very happy. But the Nuggets are out of the picture. There will be a new champion. And the Minnesota Timberwolves have to be looking around after beating the man and saying, why can't we be the man? Why not us? How come it can't be us to knock off Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving and a Dallas Mavericks team that is improved, especially defensively, but they don't have the length and the size and the chemistry that the Minnesota Timberwolves have. They don't have a veteran presence like Mike Conley. We'll talk more about Mike here in a minute. That can be true at the exact same time that the Memphis Grizzlies, healthy with the roster they have, are a top 4 team in the Western Conference next season. That is a true statement for me. Assuming that Zach Kleiman, who, quick sidebar, sold his house in Memphis recently, DeMichael posted about that on X, said people sell their houses all the time. Kleiman's not going anywhere. No need to worry. And maybe you want Kleiman to leave. I most certainly do not. But Grizzlies GM Zach Kleiman has said that they are going to address the big man position. Assuming they do that and they run it back. No other major trades. Maybe they take somebody at 9, and we'll talk more about Clingan and Edey and all that stuff. Assuming he's telling the truth, the Grizzlies are a top 4 team in the Western Conference. And maybe you're sitting there thinking to yourself, but Joe, who are you knocking out between the Thunder and the Mavericks and the Timberwolves? There's a lot of offseason that has to happen before I, divulge my take on that. But I think the Grizzlies roster has proven over the last couple of years that when they're healthy, they can compete with anybody in the NBA. And in the Western Conference, being the 2 seed the last 2 years, obviously will add some credence to that. That can be true, and Minnesota being for real can be true. And enjoying this Minnesota run can be fair. You don't have to be a hater as a Memphis Grizzlies fan. You can look at what Anthony Edwards is doing and enjoy it. It doesn't belittle Ja Morant. It doesn't make what Ja is capable of, which is just as special, if not more special, depending on your perspective. It doesn't make that any less. You can enjoy both. The Grizzlies aren't in the playoffs. Newsflash. DeMichael and I aren't talking about the next playoff series because there is no playoff series this year. We're celebrating second team all-rookie NBA teams. That's the point of the offseason that we're in. So why are you so angry, some of you out there, about the Minnesota Timberwolves getting this attention? You shouldn't be. They're handling their business. They're doing things that they're supposed to do. And Anthony Edwards and his team are in a different situation than the Memphis Grizzlies are. Anthony Edwards starts alongside 3 veteran NBA players: Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, and Mike Conley. All 3 of those guys have at least 8 seasons of NBA experience at this point. The Memphis Grizzlies have 2 such players on their entire roster: Marcus Smart and Derrick Rose. Not the same in any way, shape, or form, and that matters. If you want to criticize Kleiman for that, go for it. But the reality is the Minnesota Timberwolves have a different type of help around Anthony Edwards than Ja Morant has in Memphis. Good, bad, indifferent. That's just the reality. So kudos to the Minnesota Timberwolves, and kudos to Mike Conley. We'll end on this. In no way, shape, or form should anybody be hating on Mike Conley. Mike Conley, if he had his druthers, is probably still the starting point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies right now. Now, was that the best thing for the organization? Absolutely not. When they got the second overall pick and it became clear it was going to be Ja Morant, it made all the sense in the world to move on from Mike Conley. And Mike Conley, I'm sure, is happy for those unanswered prayers because he's playing in the Western Conference Finals while his old team in Memphis is sitting there wondering what might have been if there weren't a bunch of injuries. Conley was phenomenal for the Grizzlies. He's one of my all-time favorite players. The mask game where he broke his face and came back and was the best player on the floor in a game that included Steph Curry. All the amazing things Mike did as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies. I want Mike Conley and the Minnesota Timberwolves to win. I want them to go to the NBA Finals. As a basketball analyst, I've got Celtics in 5. I'm just going to be honest. As somebody that follows the game, Boston is clearly better than both Minnesota and the Dallas Mavericks. Assuming Boston gets past Indiana, which they should, but, Indy's been lucky to this point. But I'm going to be cheering for Minnesota because I love the way Anthony Edwards plays the game. I love how Minnesota defends, and I love that Mike Conley is a key cog in that machine, and to a lesser extent, Kyle Anderson. It's okay to cheer for Minnesota and still be excited for what Memphis will do when they see that team, hopefully at full strength, down the road. Both things can be true at the same time. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will be closing out this episode talking about things getting restless on Clingan Island, perhaps. We'll talk about that more next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to remind you about Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Content like Locked On Grizzlies, other Locked On team podcasts, Locked On NBA, and other league-wide shows. Locked On Sports Today, you can check it out on YouTube. First ever 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube. Plus, you can check it out under Amazon Fire on the Channels app. Free Channels app. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today as soon as you can, maybe after the show's over. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your very own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. FanDuel is a wonderful place to get in on the action that you're watching on the big screen. Maybe you're going to a live event, more and more people catching games live and in person than they have in a long time. FanDuel can help you enjoy all of that and then some. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Go check them out today. We come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the show talking Clingan Island and how others might be getting restless, but I'm hanging on. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax. I am your host for this episode. No DeMichael Cole. We miss him terribly. He will be back on tomorrow's edition of Locked On Grizzlies, but you're closing out this Tuesday show with me, Joe Mullinax. We've talked about Gigi Jackson being named second-team NBA All-Rookie. Congratulations to Gigi. We've talked about the Minnesota Timberwolves advancing to the Western Conference Finals, how the Grizzlies should certainly be supporting Minnesota. First off, they're not the Dallas Mavericks. Secondly, Mike Conley's on the team. Anthony Edwards plays the game in a really fun way. Lots of different reasons to support the Minnesota Timberwolves. But this is Locked On Grizzlies, and we're going to close out the show about a guy that, if you follow the show each and every day, if you're an everydayer, if you've been around, you know that Donovan Clingan's my guy, right? The big man out of UConn. Team Fee Fi Fo Fum. If Clingan's there at number 9, which some mock drafts suggest he may be, I'm taking Donovan Clingan. No fuss, no muss. But, dear listener, dear viewer, there are other bigs that are moving up the board, whether it's a Zach Edey, who DeMichael and I have talked about a couple of times here on Locked On Grizzlies, what Edey brings to the table. Very interesting prospect. And while other sources like Tankathon maybe aren't as high on Edey in terms of his draft stock, they still have him as a late first-round pick there, potentially. He's moving up. He's showing better agility than people anticipated. His size, being 7'4.5" or so in terms of his height. The fact he's a senior, this is a young man who is ready to contribute now. And he's one of the best bigs in the history of college basketball. The numbers back all of that up. A phenomenal rebounder, tremendous offensive threat, fantastic rim protector, all those things. Edey is in that mix, no denying that. You also have bigs like Missy, who is Vez Missy of Baylor, who is one of DeMichael's personal favorites. You also have Kel'el Ware of Indiana, Kyle Filipowski of Duke. There are options at and around 9 and even later in the draft if Memphis wants to go that route. But I remain on Donovan Clingan Island. Okay, Zach Edey's size is intriguing. The fact he can shoot a little bit. The fact that Edey dominated Donovan Clingan in their head-to-head matchup in the championship game, That should carry some weight. And I'm not saying I'd be anti-Edey if he were the pick at 9. That feels really high. But if Memphis somehow traded back up into the late teens, early 20s, Edey's on the board, they took a guard or a forward at 9 and they want another big, or they want to get their big there. That would be cool. Not hating on that. I would even not mind any of the other names I mentioned if that was their philosophy. But here's why I'm still in on Clingan. All right? Because this is a dude who checks boxes in a way that Memphis specifically needs checked. Okay? He may not be a three-point threat in the NBA the way that fans want him to be, the 5-out offense. That might not be his strength. The free throw percentage doesn't necessarily align with that. He can get better there, of course. He's still young, and that is something that is worth noting, his youth. He's 20 years old. But what I love about Clingan is how he can impact winning without having to score the basketball. And that is what the Memphis Grizzlies need more than anything, because they have G.G. Jackson as a reserve big that can score the basketball in a variety of ways, because they have Joe Morant and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. They have dudes who have the capacity to dribble and get penetration off the dribble, to find open shooters on the perimeter. They have dudes that can do those things. Now, they need more shooters, not disputing that. But they need a big who can impact winning without needing the score. Zach Kleiman understands that more than anybody. Steven Adams was very good at that. There's a reason why Steven Adams was such a good fit and helped Memphis while he was here. But Adams had flaws. His contract was a flaw, the way that the roster has been constructed. Adams had the knee concern, and there were issues with that, as we've heard here, there, and everywhere in terms of hearsay, how that process was handled. Adams was a very good fit for the Grizzlies, but he was not as firmly entrenched with the core because of the contract and because of the fact that while he did a lot of things well, rebounding, especially offensively, screening, passing on the elbow, you couldn't connect all the dots within the Grizzlies roster. Clingan brings a lot of what Adams was good at and builds upon it. He's like Adams 2.0. He has a phenomenal assist-to-turnover ratio, the best among bigs in the entire draft. He can be that facilitator on the post. He is a creator of offense for others in ways that G.G. Jackson can't dream of right now. He is still a very strong rebounder. He is still a very strong defender. He is more versatile defensively, the capacity to switch and move. He can do those things better than a Steven Adams. So he's an upgrade in terms of his athleticism, his ability to move. He's an upgrade in terms of the contract. And he brings similar aspects, especially as a screener, as a passer, and as a defender. He builds upon it. He's intriguing in that way for me. Not to say that Zach Edey or Kyle Filipowski or any of these other guys can't be in that mix for Memphis. Not saying that at all. There are ways to make all those names make sense. But for me at 9, I wouldn't trade up at this point. I want to stress that. Maybe to 6, maybe. Maybe you call Charlotte and see if 9 and 39 gets you 6. But other than that, I think you sit at 9 and see what's there. Because the way the board is, I'm not convinced that Clingan won't fall. And if he does, you run to the podium and you get him at 9. That's me. I think he's the best big in this draft. I think that he does a lot of things well that Memphis needs him to do well. He may not have the highest ceiling on the planet, but Memphis doesn't need that. They've got their all-stars already. They've got their superstar in Joe Morant. They need an elite role player. And I think Clingan brings that to the table more than the other names that we mentioned. But again, you can make an argument for any of them. So I'm still very comfortable on Clingan Island. Let me know how you're feeling about this draft in the comments below, please and thank you. On our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, again, DeMichael will be back. We'll take a look at how the playoffs are getting rolling. We talked a little bit about potential trade targets that we would look at. Maybe I know he talked about Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen. There's other players in Cleveland that could be intriguing as well. There's players in Orlando that we've talked about before that maybe we do a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of trades. Lots of fun things that we can continue to chat about here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Also check it out under the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Make sure that you are liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Be an everydayer. Check out our wonderful Locked On Grizzlies family each and every time that an episode drops, whether it's me, to Michael, or both of us. We do our best to bring you the best in Memphis Grizzlies conversation. Hang out with us each and every time Locked On Grizzlies hits your feed. Until next time, have a great rest of your Tuesday. Stay locked in. Remember, we are Locked On Grizzlies, free and available wherever you get podcasts. Have a good one. We'll catch you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.